LAX, from props to jets. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Celebrating Aviation with Mike Mashat. Today, we're going to look at Los Angeles International Airport during its historic transition from the piston era to the jet age. LAX had very humble beginnings. Planning for the airport started in 1927, the same year as Lindbergh's iconic solo flight from New York to Paris. Hangar 1 that you see here was constructed in 1929 and still exists at the airport today. After World War II, LAX had blossomed into a very bustling airport as the prop era took hold and Americans were traveling worldwide in ways never before done. Here you see the LAX complex just south of Century Boulevard, just west of Aviation. And this was the airport all the way from the late 40s through the late 1950s. A staple of LAX in that era was the Mike Lyman's Flight Deck restaurant. Here we see the street side view, and here's the ramp side view, a favorite for aviation enthusiasts, especially young kids who had the airplane bug, used to drag their parents to the flight deck for birthday parties. And here we see a 1949 airport open house with spectators and visitors lined up waiting for the chance to go through a then brand new Pan American Boeing Stratocruiser. The Stratocruiser was a very luxurious airplane. It featured a lower deck lounge, which was a great way to pass the time on a 12-hour flight to Hawaii or 16-hour flight to Europe. And here you can see the in-flight entertainment systems in action. Life magazine, reading a book, writing a postcard. That's about all there was in those days of prop era travel. The Stratocruiser was an amazing airplane. It was very luxurious, and it's seen here taking off on runway 25, which at that time was 4,660 feet long. But the longer range, larger airliners required the runway to be lengthened, and so it crossed Sepulveda Boulevard, where this photo was taken. That necessitated a railroad crossing gate to be used every time a Strat would take off and use the better part of the longer runway. The solution for that was the Sepulveda Tunnel, which opened in 1953, and that solved the problem of traffic flow between Imperial Boulevard and Lincoln. By now, the airport was really finding its own, and here you see a row of American Airlines DC-6s and 7s. The terminal structure that you see there at right had the unglamorous title of Sheep Run, but it was the way for passengers to walk shielded from the weather out to the gate of the airplane and to go up the stairs and board their flight. In the distance, on the left-hand side, you see buildings that are on Imperial that belong to the North American Aviation Corporation. And on the right side in the background, you see the buildings belonging to the Douglas Aircraft Company. We'll talk about those in a little bit. Here's a rather unorthodox method of loading baggage into the forward compartment of a United DC-6. But for you nostalgia buffs, this was the ground equipment in use at that time. And what could be more convenient than landing at LAX in your United DC-6B mainliner and just taking a few steps to the waiting Los Angeles Airways Sikorsky S-55 helicopter. Los Angeles Airways carried passengers in the mid-50s from LAX to a number of different cities around LA and other airports. But if you rode this helicopter, you could go to Disneyland. And here we see a classic posed shot, a Western Airlines pressurized 300-mile-per-hour Douglas DC-6B, always referred to as the thoroughbred of piston-powered airliners, and a stewardess, as they were called at that time, waving to the pilot in the giant Skyliner, Queen of the Skies. Luxury on board was the rule in those days. Here we see a first-class lounge in the TWA Constellation with a nice spread of food and fine dining. Notice that the mural above the windows was actually unique to each aircraft. They were hand painted and then mounted in the airplanes. and each TWA Connie had a mural in the first class lounge. Other aircraft that frequented LAX were the Convair liners of United, American, and Western Airlines. These were the equivalent of today's regional jets, and they made the milk runs up and down the coast of California and to points east. And then, of course, you had the United DC-6 and the DC-6s and 7s of the Douglas DC family were the backbone of piston-powered passenger transportation in those days. And of course, the iconic triple-tailed Lockheed Constellation. This is a Super Connie, as we see here. This ramp shot of LAX shows a 749 Constellation at the left, taxiing away from the gate, a 1049 Super G at the gate awaiting its passengers. And here we are in about 1958 or so. And there were some very interesting things starting to happen. The promise of jet airliners was in the air, on the horizon actually, and people were reading all about this exciting new method of travel in the magazines and periodicals at that time. Douglas had a design called the DC-8, and this design was on the drawing boards, while Boeing actually had an airplane in the air. This is the revolutionary Boeing 367-80. First flew on July 15th, 1954. And this was the progenitor of the Boeing 707. It was developed to be an Air Force tanker. And so as Pan Am started to promote the jet stratoliner, as they called it, you can see it was based on the KC-135 tanker's fuselage, which was 3 and 2 seating. And this was a bit narrow. And so to compete with Douglas's DC-8, which was 6 across, Boeing widened the fuselage, and that became a game changer. Here we see the analysis that was required to adapt the new jetliners to the existing airport infrastructure. The amount of ground equipment compared to today with underground refueling and all sorts of other advances like auxiliary power units and things like that. These early jets required all sorts of equipment to make them run, start the engines, and so it was a bit cumbersome to adapt these new airplanes. In fact, there were studies for turning radius, jet blast. You could see as a jet started turning and powering away from the gate of the old style airports, they'd be blowing over people and trucks and baggage carts and who knows what. So they had to be very careful about how they would actually park the airplanes. And the solution at LAX, when the first Boeing 707 came into service in January of 1959 with American Airlines, was to actually park the jet at the end of the sheep run. So here you see the lone 707. The ground tug is already attached. Stairs are pulled away. I'm guessing they're about to launch the airplane, probably starting engines out on the taxiway. But here we see mom, dad, and the kids boarding their 707 flagship for a trip to New York. And what's amazing is 6 hours after this photo was taken, they were getting off the same airplane at New York's Idlewild Airport. Some of the final operations at the original LAX airport site, Western received its Boeing 720s in April of 1961. And in June of 61, the new Airport of the Future was dedicated. This is a fantastic rendering by English artist Douglas Ettridge, and it shows the LAX Jetport, or as they call it, the Jet Age Satellite Terminal Complex. You see there the new tower and the iconic theme building, and of course the ocean right off the end of the runways. So if you're not familiar with how the old airport oriented to what is there today, let me take you through this. Let's start with these United Airlines maintenance hangars. And these buildings still exist, this roadway still exists today, so I'm going to show you where they are. This is a view of the airport with Aviation Boulevard on the right, the Sepulveda Tunnel on the left. And that's where it is relative to LAX of today. Here we see the airport being built just before its opening. This is the Western ramp, which now, of course, is the Delta and American facility, just east of the tunnel and just south of Century Boulevard. But the new terminals, the satellite idea was brilliant in that each airline would have a satellite with airplanes parked around it. And in the beginning, passengers walked out the doors, down the steps, out to the airplane, up the boarding stairs, and into the jet. But the solution to really modern operation was something called a jetway, which are the movable bridges that connect to the doors of the airplane. And here you see separate entrances for first class and coach. And of course, that's been done away with in the new, more modern iterations of the terminals. We were talking about the defense plants on the Imperial side of the airport, and let's chat about that for a moment. Hangar 1, declared a National Historic Landmark, is seen there on the left, and the Douglas facility on the right. That sign on the engineering building was very famous. It was a great ad for anybody landing at the airport to look over and see Fly Douglas. But when this facility was closed in the 1960s, the sign itself actually moved to Long Beach, and it was modernized for the new space age logo. In 1980, it became Fly DC Jets, and this is on top of the final assembly building at Long Beach, Building 84. And this is declared a California California Historic Landmark. And this is still there today. If you drive by the 405 next to the airport and look over, you can see this red and blue neon sign in all its glory every night. But back to the ramp at Inglewood. This is the North American plant looking north to the airport. You see the LA Airways helicopter over there on the right. They were building jets like this F-86D Sabre, and you can see the tower and the original airport terminals off in the distance. They also built the supersonic F-100 Super Sabre. This is the first operational airplane to maintain supersonic speed and level flight. And here we are on the very northeast corner of the North American ramp, which today is the very northeast corner of the freight terminal complex. In the background, you see traffic there, and that's Aviation Boulevard. And believe it or not, in that open field now sits the Proud Bird restaurant. So let's talk about progress. Here we have the cockpit of a Lockheed Constellation, late 1940s technology. For you airplane buffs, yes, those are P-38 control wheels. And 10 years later, you have the jet cockpit of the Douglas DC-8, oxygen masks, all sorts of new avionics and equipment, navigation aids that were the state of the art for the beginning of the jet age. And so to go from cabins that look like this in American Airlines DC-7 and the passenger experience that looked like this in that airplane, I think I see a future flight attendant in this photo. To the jet age where you've got this, my gosh, that looks like the Greek theater, that's so big. The starlight lighting effect used on TWA 707s actually projected stars on the roof of the cabin, and that was a nice little effect. But this painting by noted legendary LA illustrator Ren Wicks kind of gives the impression that you've got more room than you know what to do with in first class on that TWA 707. Ren was one of the greats in the industry and was terrific with aviation. Here we've got a 707, looks like it's launching into orbit, but it conveyed the excitement, the drama of the new jet age with 600-mile-per-hour airplanes, vibration-free, quiet cabins, just a very luxurious experience. They eventually added movies in the early 60s, and it was a great way to travel. So I'd like to close with a look at some of the airplanes that flew into LAX, and there weren't that many. And in the year that the airport opened, 1961, there were very few first-generation jets in service. So you had the Boeing 707, seen here in TWA colors, the Douglas DC-8, seen here taking off from its manufacturing plant in Long Beach. There were turboprops. A turboprop is a jet engine attached to a propeller. It's kind of a best of both worlds. And so you had the Bonanza F-27, Fairchild F-27, seen here on the ramp at the end of the terminal complex, which today is the Tom Bradley terminal. Continental flew their Viscount 710 from the Midwest out to LAX, beautiful airplane. And of course, the Lockheed Electra, which was built across town in Burbank. At the end of that time period, the new kid just entering service was the Convair 880, seen here in Delta colors. An elegant design, used General Electric engines, and was a very fast, sleek airplane. For any of you Elvis fans out there, if you've ever seen the airplane at Graceland, and it was his personal jet, it was a former Delta Convair 880. And here's the forward lounge. Gosh, it just doesn't get any more 1960s than this, does it? So there you have it, a look at LAX at the beginning of the jet age. And we're going to close with some views of the theme building, as you see here in 1963. Here it is in 1984. You can actually see the Hollywood sign off in the hills in the background on the right. And here it is today. So as we bid farewell to LAX, we can see from history that it grew from a modest little prop era airport into what is now the 4th busiest airport in the world, the 2nd busiest airport in the United States. Thank you so much for celebrating aviation with Mike Machat. As always, I'd like to thank some of the good folks who helped make this video possible. Craig Cadera, Jeff Thomas of airlineratings.com, Michael O'Leary of Air Classics Magazine, and the late John Proctor, who was our generation's dean of commercial aviation and literature, one of the greats, and many of his wonderful photos were used in this presentation. A special shout out to the wonderful people at the Flight Path Museum, LAX. They are the keeper of the flame of all the rich history of this great airport and commercial aviation in Southern California. Until next time, take care.